Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Vivi Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
So Whit, I gotta say, one of the things that really pisses me off about the Clinton administration during this whole coronavirus hoax is the fact that they are such snowflakes. I mean, lock the country down in January and order 50 bajillion testing kits the minute the first report of the virus gets back to us from China. Appoint Richard Preston to head the COVID-19 task force.
Oh yeah, wait. I know what you're doing here.
What am I doing? And they're so smug and school marmish about the whole thing. I mean, so fine. We only had 200 cases in the US, but geez, how many TikToks am I going to have to watch of Hillary washing hands in a pantsuit? At least she's had more practice than most of us being married to Bill, am I right?
All right. Look, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, this did not occur.
Sad
the whole
piece.
Clinton presidency thing. We did not get a head start on the virus. We did not order a bajillion testing kits. Donald Trump is president. He ordered no testing kits to speak of, and he is currently estimating that between 100,000 and 200,000 people are going to die from COVID-19, which suddenly makes this seem a lot less funny now that I'm talking about it, while claiming that he is not responsible for anything and is in fact doing a great job.
Motherfucker.
And that, dear friends, is why we are talking about alternative histories on today's episode of the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast. And to do that, we are joined by Sue Monk-Kidd. Sue's debut, The Secret Life of Bees, spent more than 100 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, became an award-winning major motion picture, and has been translated into 36 languages. Her second novel, The Mermaid Chair, was a #1 New York Times bestseller and was adapted into a television movie. Her third novel, The Invention of Wings, was an Oprah's Book Club 2.0 pick and also a #1 New York Times bestseller. She is the author of acclaimed memoirs, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, a groundbreaking work on religion and feminism, and the New York Times bestseller, Traveling with Pomegranates, which she wrote with her daughter, Ann Kidd Taylor. Her new novel, The Book of Longings, is coming out on April 21st. Welcome, Sue.
Thanks for having me.
The Book of Longings is about a young woman named Anna, or is it Anna? What's the right pronunciation? I've just been reading it.
Anna.
Okay, I'll say Anna. Anna, who becomes the wife of Jesus. You've described it as an alternate history story. For any listeners out there who might be unfamiliar with that term, I'm wondering if you could talk about what an alternate history story means to you and how it applies to your new book.
I'm not sure I had that concept when I first started, but I soon realized that that's what I was doing. I was writing an alternate history. Let me just say this about history itself. When I was writing The Invention of Wings, that's a historical novel, I had to think a lot about history and what it means. And I realized that history is not a fixed thing. You know, we have this idea that it's static, that it's some place in the past, and that's the way it was. But the more I looked into this, I began to understand that history is a construction of a narrative. And that narrative is written, or actually it's gathered together by a lot of evidence. Now, what evidence do you choose to look at, and which evidence do you leave out? Which voices are in that evidence and which voices aren't in that evidence? And then you have to interpret all of this evidence. And you do that based on what? Your predilections, your biases, your family system, the culture you're in, whether you're privileged or not privileged, on just so many different things. What's your worldview? Now, the next thing I learned was that history is more or less constructed by men for men. And so
we have discussed that a few times on the podcast.
Have you? Okay. Okay, we're on to something then. So all of these things were playing into my thoughts about history. And I believe that we really are the sum. Actually, I think I'm stealing this from Toni Morrison. I think she said, we are the sum of our history. And so we become that in a way, and we fix it in our mind. So part of what an alternate history is about, is to shake that up. And so, history needs to be radically reimagined from time to time because it's never really complete. And that's a different way, I guess, that I had of thinking about history. So yes, I realized I was writing an alternate history. And why did I want to do that? Because, okay, I'm going to try to make this quick. Because when Jesus became a bachelor, it really screwed up a lot of things. And I think I wanted to rewrite that because this is at the heart of so many problems for women, not just in religion, but in the culture, because, it's spread out in Western culture, that is. So let's imagine that Jesus wasn't a bachelor. What would that look like? And one of the questions that really gripped me, and I actually wrote it on a card, propped it on my desk, was how would the world be different if Jesus had had a wife who had really been a partner and had a story and been part of the whole narrative? How would we be different? And I was convinced it would be quite different. For one thing, the highest value wouldn't be celibacy and virginity. I mean, that probably would be really different.
I've sort of moved on from that
Yeah.
as being a high value.
Yeah. I mean, and we have this breach between sexuality and spirituality that has impacted so many things. Jesus was too holy to be sexual, so he's not really like us. There are all kinds of ramifications from this, but the one that really was most significant to me, because I have been for a very long time, at least 20 years, studying and trying to understand and look into the misogyny within religion and how that plays out in women's lives and in who we are and in how the culture approaches women. So I had to look at it from that standpoint particularly, and I know that women would not have had as many limitations placed on them if Jesus had had a wife. So that's the reason for the alternate history.
As you're talking, I can't help but think, one of my favorite sections of the book, and how could it not be, would just be the moment when Anna sets eyes on Jesus for the first time. And Jesus, he is really attractive. And it's really, it's a hugely fun passage to read because it's so different from, of course, like our entrenched, as you just said, our entrenched views of who he was. And so, we're talking on this episode about alternate histories, which have been particularly popular in recent years. Philip K. Dick's 1962 novel, The Man in the High Castle, was recently made into a popular TV series, as was Roth's The Plot Against America. And of course, Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad was wildly popular a few years back and is being turned into a TV series by Barry Jenkins. Why do you think alternative history is appealing and to so many people right now? Why is it coming back?
I loved watching The Man in the High Castle, and I have started watching Plot Against America. I think probably because it gives us this shocking, in a way, maybe the word is astonishing, startled way of thinking about our history. It makes us think, whoa, what if it was different? What if it had been different? What would that mean? Or maybe it scares us, as in, how fragile is this government? How fragile is our life? And this could it turn into something autocratic, just like that? So I think it jolts us. Was it Kafka that said a book should be like an ice? Well, I've forgotten it. It should crack open the ice in us is kind of the idea. And I think that's what an alternate history somehow does. It causes us to just think dramatically different. And that's really good for us because what an alternate history does is kind of loosen up the possibilities. And I think fiction is not just to look at our culture and say, see, this is what we have, and this is what it means, but to say, what is possible? And I think that is what E.M. Foster was talking about when he said that fiction is meant to deliver a series of small astonishments, or maybe one big one, you know.
Sue, your alternate history is what I'd call positive. It attempts to unearth the truth that has been hidden by our official, quote unquote, history, which you're alluding to in your earlier answer. But there are also what I would call negative alternative histories out there. The Trump administration and Fox News, in my personal opinion, are trying to create their own alternate history, working daily to rewrite Trump's failings on COVID-19 in a more positive light, which is why we're all here in separate places doing this podcast rather than being together. So I wonder if some of the impetus to create positive alternative histories comes out of our awareness that negative ones are being created as well.
I can't really say I was that perceptive, actually. But I think it gives impetus to the reason to do it. When I think of what is going on every afternoon with these press conferences, I suppose in a way they're trying to create an alternate history, but it seems more in the moment, in real time, that we're just creating a whole alternate reality. And it's as if there's a transaction going on of how to take truth and take a lie, turning it into truth. And that's an interesting idea. That may be different than creating an alternate history. I don't know. This just seems bizarre, what's going on there. But I suppose if it works, and it seems to work in some quarters, then you end up with an alternate history. But
that's, to me, the political side of it is like, I think of Stalinism, and we're not going to get too far afield and we want to talk about your book, but, authoritarian governments, part of the deal they make with their citizens is like, we're going to create an alternate history. What we say is true, and you just have to believe it, and it's a matter of faith. And I feel like I'm worried that like those press briefings that Trump has every day are sort of testing out whether that he can pull that off or not.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I worry about this too. I worry whether it can get traction in people's minds and actually become the version that everybody accepts. So then somebody down the road is going to have to write an alternate history to this fake history. It's getting very complicated, but
yeah. And it's interesting to mention the briefings, of course, which have become a daily event that people, it's sort of like a litmus test. I have friends who say, I never watch the briefings anymore. My partner has banned me from watching the briefings, or I don't watch the briefings because I know he's just going to lie. And a number of networks have recently decided, because it's full of lies, not to carry it. And then yesterday I saw that Trump is list building off of the mainstream media's decision to not carry his alternative history. So there's an alternative history to the alternative history, which is that Trump has said, essentially, the quote unquote lamestream media with their fake news won't carry my briefings in full. Won't you sign my petition? They're not giving me my full due. So even there, they're sort of, I felt like I was watching this, a history house of cards being built. And I also just think that the readership for this is so strange, because we're seeing the fruit of decades of defunding of public education that has created an audience, a reading audience and a political audience unlike any we've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And
like everything's getting politicized now, everything.
Once you were in the project, what were some of the challenges that you faced, and what were the things that came surprisingly easily that you thought maybe would be difficult?
One thing that I was concerned about doing was making this relationship between Jesus and Anna believable. I think people have a lot of resistance, maybe, that it's internal. They've internalized the idea that the tradition, not necessarily a fact, but a tradition that Jesus was not married, that he was this celibate bachelor. And so I think we have to deconstruct some of that.
And can you just stop for just a moment and explain that part, that there is a part of Jesus's life that we don't really know about, right?
That's
Isn't that
right.
sort of where that's the lacuna where you're inserting the story in a way?
Yes, for the largest part, yes. It happens off stage of biblical scriptures. Uh, from the time he was 12 to the time he was around 30 and took up his public ministry, we have no record of him really. And it just seemed quite probable that he had a wife at some point. I mean, he may have, he may not. I have no real position on the subject. It was never about believing it. It was about imagining it. I'm a novelist. I wanted to imagine it for many reasons that we've been talking about. But I think to try and deconstruct the resistance we have to believing that was a problem. You know, it wasn't a problem to write their relationship. It was a problem to think about whether the reader was going to buy it or not. And, you know, I think we internalize kind of a different, maybe it's the old fear of authority in the church that we worry about offending, or maybe it's our own unease with holiness and sexuality, because, you know, it's like oil and water. Maybe it's all kinds of things, I don't know. Or maybe we just have a problem with women. But I think that was in my mind. And I worked really hard to make this a human experience. I wanted to show the human side of Jesus, and to make that more important somehow for us to grasp that he was a human being with human needs. It was like us. So I didn't go into his post-Easter persona or reality that happened. What else was difficult? Well, it wasn't what was easy. Maybe I'll say what was easy.
Yeah.
Was writing Anna's story for me was like everything I had ever wanted to say about the yearning in women to be a voice in the world, to have those limitations removed from them, to leave the margins, to move to the center. It just poured out of me. Another thing, I don't know why I'm quoting my husband today, but here I go again. He said to me when he didn't read, I don't let anyone read my manuscript except my daughter. She's my reader, and she reads it chapter by chapter. Not my editor, no one, just my daughter, basically. And so when I gave him the manuscript to read, he didn't say a word about it until he finished it, and he came in. The first thing he said to me was, "Oh, I see a lot of Anna. I see a lot of you in Anna." That's what he said. And that sort of surprised me. And I thought, oh, dear Lord, I have put far too much of myself into Anna. But it is true. I recognize myself there. That yearning to have a voice in the world, to not be silenced. Just so many things. And I too took a feminist quest. Anna's is a feminist quest. So those things were, I won't say easy to write, because writing is never really easy. But I had an affinity for writing it, and I was passionate about writing it.
So one of the things that you're talking about and that recurs powerfully in your work is deep friendship and loyalties between women, women who are friends, women who are related. I'm thinking of Yalta and Anna here. I wonder if you could read a passage about deep friendship and loyalties between women for us.
I would be glad to do that. This will be my first public reading of this.
Yay.
Oh, we're honored.
Yeah. Well, I should set it up a little bit.
Please.
Anna, as I think was mentioned earlier, has been betrothed to an older widower, a rather bitter man who's repugnant to her. And this is a forced marriage kind of situation. And she is now arrived at the palace of Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee, who is hosting this betrothal ceremony. And I'm going to just pick up with where she is. She's been ushered to a bedchamber and before the ceremony takes place, and she's kind of waiting for it. "So, you are the lamb to be sacrificed," a voice said in Greek. Turning, I saw a dark-skinned, wraith-like woman standing beside a grand bed that was swathed in jewel-colored silks. Her black hair cascaded down her back like a spill of ink. It had to be Phasaelus, Antipas' wife. All of Galilee and Perea knew that her father, Aretas, king of the Nabateans, had conspired with Herod Antipas' father to arrange their marriage as a way to stop skirmishes along their common border. It was said that upon hearing her fate, Phasaelus, only 13 at the time, cut her arms and wrists and cried for 3 days and 3 nights. The shock of her presence in the room left me momentarily mute. She was dazzling standing there, in her scarlet dress and golden mantle, but pitiable too, her life turned into a ploy by 2 men. "Are you capable of speaking Greek, or are you simply too docile to answer me?" Her tone was scoffing, as if I were an object of amusement to her. Phasaelus' rebuke was a slap, and it was like waking. A feeling of loss and wrath rose in me. I wanted to shout at her, "I am betrothed to someone I despise, and who despises me in return. I have little hope I will see the man I love ever again. I don't know what has become of my brother. Words are life to me, yet my writings are buried in the ground. My heart is sickled like wheat tares, and you speak to me like I'm weak and imbecilic." I did not care if she possessed the stature of a queen. I thundered at her, "I am no lamb." A flash in her eyes. "No, I see you're not. You heap condescension on me, but we are no different, you and I." A sneer slid into her voice. "Inform me, please. How are we no different?" "You were forced to marry, as I am now forced. Were not each of us used by our fathers for their own selfish purposes? We are both wares to be traded." She walked toward me, and her scent floated out, nard and cinnamon. Her hair swayed, her hips oscillated. I thought of the lurid dance my mother had seen her perform. How I would have loved to see it. I feared she was coming to slap me for my insolence, but I saw her eyes had softened. She said, "When I last saw my father 17 years ago, he wept bitterly and begged forgiveness for sending me to this wasteland. He told me it was for a noble reason, but I spit on the floor before him. I cannot forget. He loved his kingdom more than me. He married me to a jackal." I saw the difference then. Her father had traded her for peace. My father had traded me for greed. She smiled, and I saw this time there was no guile in it. "We shall be friends," she said, taking my hand, "not because our fathers or our shared misfortune. We shall be friends because you are no lamb, and I too am no lamb."
Oh gosh, thank you so much. I love that passage. And through her friendship with Phasaelus, who's Herod's wife, Anna finds the strength to speak up for herself. So is that what Anna means on her incantation bowl on which is inscribed, quote, "She was a voice"?
Not exactly. I think that is part of what she meant, was this strength to stand her ground, to speak for herself when it was called for. But I really had in mind something else, and that was a kind of passion that was innate in Anna, important to her. It was her longing, and it was to write the narratives of silenced women, of stories that were lost. You know, in the scriptures, it's something like 2% of all of the quotes or sayings are by women, and many of them aren't even named. Anna was as disturbed by that as I am, and she wanted to write these stories of these lost matriarchal stories. She wanted to bring attention to the voices of women and her own. So that was her longing. I once had someone ask me years ago, what is the thing that lies deepest in your heart? What is the longing that is at the bottom of your heart? Wow. And you know what came to me was, I want to be a novelist. And that's where that recognition started for me. Maybe I had something like that in mind for Anna, that she recognized this desire and need in her to make a difference. So this is what her voice is about. And she has this incantation bowl, which her aunt Yaltha gives to her. And she's told to write her deepest longing, or that thing that lies at the bottom of her heart, or her prayer, or whatever you want to call it, in a spiraling fashion inside this bowl. And she does that, but she thinks very carefully about what it will be. And she takes it very seriously, because it is now making this kind of real and tangible to her. So she writes essentially this prayer: when I am dust, sing these words over my bones, she was a voice. So that's what she means by being a voice in the world, and being a kind of scribe to it.
We're so glad you could join us on the podcast.
It was my pleasure. I absolutely loved being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And we encourage our listeners to pick up a copy of Sue Monk Kidd's new novel, The Book of Longings, which is out April 21st from Viking. Thanks a lot.